Another Sunday, and we are again hunting for the weekend sketches. They are here somewhere near wheeteck. We are somewhere in the center of town, and we're gonna sketch this building today. David Elias. It's 1928. That's when it's built. This building is located on the corner of Short Street and Middle Road in Singapore. Was built by the Jewish merchant David J. Elias to house his trading company. I think the original building was somewhat orangey or yellow in color. Today, of course, it's being refurbed and it's just about to be reopened. I think there's still not many shops, or in fact, I don't think there's any shops running at the moment. The building is 3 stories tall. It has the words David Elias Buildings and 1928 etched at the top, and you could see various stars of David around the sides of the building as well. So it's quite a prominent Jewish building in the middle of Singapore. The weekend sketches are a diligent bunch, but nobody wants to be under the sun, so we are hiding under the shades. In fact, we borrowed Starbucks table and chairs, and after paying our rent, i.e. bought some coffee, sat down and plonked ourselves and started sketching. As for me, I came very late. I had only about 40 minutes, so I decided I will shortcut everything and just smash something out. Even with smashing, I needed to plan. So my intent and plan is to not sketch the detail, but sketch the impression. Well, there'll be some lines that basically spells out David Elias building, but more or less it will be an impression of what I see of this building. I asked Monique over lunch after we have finished the sketch, what is the best tip she's ever received as a sketcher. She said, don't count the number of windows. I really like that tip. I'm gonna pass that on to you. Monique is the one that I gave credit to at the beginning of the video, Monique Tendencia. And I like that because, you know, when you are sketching an impression, you really don't want to count the windows, the number of windows that's on your sketch. You're just going to try to get an impression of the place. Notice also that I'm going in with very bold line. I intend to contrast this with the background, where I will use thinner lines to depict what is in front and what is at the back. I'm thinking of this as a line, ink and wash as opposed to a watercolor sketched. So as you can see that I have not really, count the windows. You could see that the draft pencil sketch, it's very inaccurate. Doesn't get the placement of the windows right and so on. I intend to go in wet on wet somewhat with the windows and not going to be very accurate. But the impression will be quite, sufficiently representational, and it should say David Elias Buildings. The other thing I intended for this sketch is to be very clear around the shadows and the light. The roof clearly is lit with sunlight. The rest of the building beneath the roof are clearly in the shade. The truck in front is in light. The front, the ground are all in the light as well. Closer to me, there's actually a shadow patch that runs across. I intend to use a shadow to push the eye forward. As you can see, there's a couple of lines I've laid down on the ground just in front of the truck. And I've also laid down a couple of imaginary figures, and that will contrast with some darkened figures on the left. You could see in the distance, walking in a 5-foot way in the building itself. That should contrast it nicely in terms of size of figure, distance, space, and so on. All in all, the impression should say David Elias. And how do I intend to do it? Well, it's going to be basically lots of blue, lots of maybe a bit of purple thrown in, a bit of orange for the roof, and some yellow, and bright color where it's lit, and shaded color, shade as in like color muted in the shadows for those areas, especially in the buildings, and undercarriage of the truck, and maybe distance as well. The distant, buildings far beyond on the right hand side, where they are a bit more muted. That's kind of like the attack plan, the intent of making these impressions. The stuff that are in the light, the roof, the truck, the people, the figures on the right, on the left, on the right, they will get prominent with bold ink lined, and the rest of it I intend to use just lightly sketched, very thin lined, and because I'm using the Sailor Profit Model FUD Fute Neep, they are able to give me thick or thin depending on the angle that I'm using against the paper. The paper I'm using is 100% cotton, 300 GSM, and it's actually made in China. It's not really branded. I don't really recommend it. This is the first time I'm using it. Not quite impressed. And but it is smooth. I'm using the hot press version. It's quite easy to draw on it. So at least that's the beauty when you're using hot press paper. So as you can see, the stuff at the back, mostly on the right, I use a very thin line to represent them. In other words, I'm trying to contrast thick line for near, thin line for far. Okay, I'm done with the drawing, or at least the impression. So I'm going to lay down my name, wheeteck, and the date, as well as the building I'm drawing, David Elias Buildings, 1928. I think it's kind of like okay. Let's see how I paint it. But I think from a time perspective, because I only have 50 minutes thereabout to do this, the throwdown and the show and tell will start at about 12 something, and it's already 11 something. So I hope I can kind of catch the train. Let's see. Okay, let's give you some of my thinking process in terms of how I intend to attack this. As you can see, the thick lines are front and the thin lines are distance, and I am going to sort of start with the sky. It's cobalt blue, and I'm going to throw in a little bit of the quinacridone rose, pinkish. It's not really in the sense realistic or reality, but it does push the building's background to the background, right? And it gives a bit of a pop for the building in front. That's really the idea of using blue, or mixing a bit of red, making it say purple. Purple is a distant color, and it sort of pushes it to the back. Plus the idea that purple is a beautiful color and a color I love, so I use it all the time. Again, I don't really mix the purple on the palette. I let the blue and the red mix on the paper, intentionally, of course. That's making it sort of bright, if you like. And the way I lay down the colors is a bit of a dance, if you like. The color just slap on, and they are not really painted or drawn on the paper. I don't really like to paint or draw with my brush. I intend to just drop the colors and go sort of dab, if you like. In many ways, you should learn to allow your brush to dance on the paper. It's a lot of fun when it's just dancing around, and it's really a little bit irrelevant, a little bit random, if you like. Adds a bit of color, no pun intended, to the whole process. The other thing I was thinking about when I was doing this is also try to mute the colors as well, and to represent some of the shadow. So I'm trying to push the building to the front, and trying to use shadow to sort of indicate the depth of the building itself. Some things in front, some things at the back. There are shadows on the right, there are shadows at the bottom part of the building, where there are sort of the figures on the left. Those are really darkened part of shadow part of the building. I'm also laying down a big swatch of shadow in front. That will do two things. One, it will push your eyes to the top, and two, it's really to frame where the light and shades or shadows are in this sketch. So okay, as you can see, shadow first, and this is where in some ways it helps to frame, create a construct of you know, light and shadow for the whole sketch. I realized that actually the building itself is also shadowed to some way. I lightened the shadowed color and I placed that you know, in the entire building, but it's underneath the roof, the parts that's below the roof, it's all shaded. So okay, I continue to color and I continue to read where the shades are and how light the shade should be, not trying to overpower. And I think it's very important to sort of control the mid-tones, not to go straight too dark into complete, you know, top of the range dark values, if you like. I'm also putting down the shadows on the figures. The shadows surround the white building, and you know, really just to let my brush dance around a little bit, dab, 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 and that's kind of like how I, you know, it's kind of like a fencing, a bit of a jab, and so on and so forth. So at this point, with the rough shadows in place, I intend to go bright. The colors that are bright will be the roof, the shirts of the two figures in front, and maybe the trees to the right of the white building. I think that's about it. Even the signage of David Elias buildings is actually in the shade as well. I forgot that part, so I'm just putting in a little bit more shade. Second layer of shades in to indicate where the shadowed part of the bottom part of the building, and it's sort of coming together because shadows define 3-dimension, and with proper shadow you will see that you know, the eye sees space and therefore 3D. The truck clearly was not parked there. It was from a photograph. I took it just in the nick of time as it was passing, and I'm using it as a reference. The figures to the right, they were from imaginations and basically put in just to spice up the sketch, if you like. Sketch with figures will always be more interesting than sketch without figures, so it's always very important to kind of just put figures into the sketch, just to indicate that there's life. It's not a desert, it's not a ghost town. It's an interesting place because there are people in it. Like I said, bright color. I'm using a bit of lemon yellow, a bit of new gamboge, a bit of cadmium yellow, and blue, it's mostly cobalt. One of the most interesting thing you can do with color is to indicate light and shade. As you can see later on when I do the roof, colors should be very clear when they are in the light, and it's very clear when they are in the shade. I'm putting down a bit of lemon yellow with a bit of green gold, and that sort of indicate the trees on the right, to the right of the white building, if you like. And I'm putting in to sort of separate the two trees, one on top, one on the bottom, and there's a sunlight that hits part of it. At least the bottom tree, part of it is hit, and you can see the separation of the two trees. I'm still following the advised, not counting the windows, and I'm just, you know, again trying to go in, softening some of the edges later on, but try not to make too distinct a mark, at least for the parts of the building that's behind or in the background. You don't want it to be too loud, too obvious, too sharp, in focus, enough to indicate little things like windows, shades, signages and whatnot. And if it's too ghastly and too bright, just mute it down later on. At least that's the intention. So since I'm painting an impression, and you know, I'm just gonna go easy. Now it's the time to put in the roof. One of the things I try to do in every shape is not to use the same color. This is a combination of cadmium yellow, cadmium red, orange, and a bit of lemon yellow thrown in, and that is really just to state a very, very bold, very, very colorful, you know, roof. In Singapore, at least, we get a lot of orange roof, and it gives the opportunity to throw down cadmium orange in abundance. I love it, actually. That's one of my favorite color, but you can't really use too much of it because it's very ghastly. It's too much. So and of course I mute down by mixing a little bit of gray into the orange, and I use that to indicate the parts where you can see the windows, where they are actually depths of orange. And you can see that the orange is indicating where the light and the shades are, right? The roof where the sun hits directly is bright orange, and the building's facade where there are depths of orange, they are muted orange, orange that has been mixed with gray, and that would give the eyes the impression and also the idea that it's in the shade, within the shadow. So by just using colors and color differentiation between light and shade, you could tell your audience very clearly which part of the sketch is in the light and which part of the sketch is in the shade. And that actually is one of the most important things that you're doing if you're going to shortcut your sketch, or in other words, you're just sketching light, and you're trying to ignore everything else, accuracy, details, and so on and so forth. I've gone in and put a few sort of bold pigment, red and blue on the white building at the back. They are indication, they are impressions of the lines that's actually there. And again, that's sort of bring it to sharp focus, if you like. That patch of white building will push the building in front in shade, David Elias buildings, to the forefront. It sort of gives it a bit of a push in terms of space, and therefore creating a feel for a 3-dimension to the sketched. Putting a bit of shadows to the pants and skirt of the two figures on the right, and again I push the dark a little bit, and I'm trying not to overdo the darks, if you like, just enough to indicate shadows and spots of dark, again really to create form and therefore 3-dimension. But apart from that, that's pretty much it. Not trying to do too much with the dark. Well, I'm coming towards the end of the sketch itself. In that sense, I'm still dancing around with my number 6 Escoda travel brush, and indicate some figures, heads, torso, legs, maybe add a few more figures to the left, and I think that's about it. That's all I want to say, and maybe not too much. After all, I'm running out of time. The throwdown, the show and tell is about to start. I really have to finish up my sketch. Coming so late, most of them had 3 hours front to back, and I'm just getting roughly around 40 minutes. I really can't count windows at this point, just smashing it. So I hope you enjoy this sketching impression of David Elias buildings, and it's been a wonderful outing, and for me, even though I don't really have a lot of time, I still try to sketch whenever I can. So okay, the final touches probably, sometimes you do need to stand back and evaluate your sketch and see what's still missing. Squint your eyes looking at the scenery, and then squint your eyes looking at the sketch, and decide whether you need a few more touch to make it more believable. There are some ornaments of the building I missed. They are all dark spots. I think they are sort of birds or something. I'm not sure. Wasn't looking very carefully around it, but I'm kind of just dropping in. And I also noticed that I haven't really create a bit of a 3-dimensional feel to the veranda, the protruding sort of objects underneath the windows. Give it a bit of shadows, and I think that's it. Give it a bit more shadows and form on the trees. And I think I'm kind of done almost, and at this point I know that if I do a little bit more touch here and there, the sketch might just get ruined, or it won't look like an impression. It'll just look like I'm trying too hard, and when you're trying too hard, sometimes the sketch just go bad. So remember that, know when to stop. Well, actually it's always hard to know when to start, but the second hardest thing is really to know when to stop. I think I've put enough bright spots on the sketch, and a little bit of touch of red just for fun and for kicks. And okay, that's it. I think better stop now and get ready for the show and tell. Hope you enjoy that. Yeah. So okay, that's my finished sketch. Taking shots, and these are some of the lovely ladies that was sketching today with us. The weekend sketches, and then the throwdown, showing off our work.
Everybody.
The turnout was okay, was not too great, but it was still a decent size despite a very, very hot day out today. So this is wheeteck. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Stay safe wherever you are. Bye.